So I have a video today that I'm super excited for you to have, which is all about this idea of like making convincing or somewhat convincing drum and percussion sounds out of a bunch of mismatched gear in a home recording setting. You don't need a full drum kit to, especially I would say for like singer-songwriter, indie folk rock type stuff, to create a groove that you can build other instrumentation around. And there's some really cool stuff you can do if you use your imagination a little bit and do some creative processing. So with that being said, let's dive in here. Okay, so I'm in the session here, and I just want to show you through a few things that are kind of interesting with the way this came together. So I have all the tracks here, and I'll start with the snare drum, and I'll just go through it in order, but one at a time. This is like my overhead sort of snare sound that I'm getting. A little bit of EQ there, and I think flip the polarity with the trim as well. Okay, and then the this is the close mic. It's just a 57. So just getting like that low end oomph of the snare with that close mic. And the way it's EQ'd, and then I blended in a sample there as well. So this is triggering with whenever the actual snare hits. Just a quick tangent about snare drums. This is like a not a nice snare drum that I'm using for this, and it sounds pretty good. And the big reason for that is tuning. So I finally got myself a drum key, which costs like $7 or something, and all I did for this was tighten the crap out of the bottom resonant head of the snare drum, and basically just finger tightened the top lugs for the batter side of the snare. Made sure the snare was like the snare wires were situated well so that I could have a good range of control over their tightness with the knob on the side of the drum, and then just a bit of dressing to muffle some of the overtones from the snare batter side. Isaac from the future here. When I was watching this video back the next day, I realized I didn't go into that much detail about what the actual dressing and tuning of the snare drum were beyond what I just said in the video. So here's the snare drum, and this is how I had it set up for this recording. So all I have here is my wallet opened up because I thought that sounded better, and this piece of paper, half of it taped on to one side of the drum. And then basically this is how the drum sounds. And then if I take the snare off, this is how it sounds. And if I take the muffling off, or the wallet at least, this is how it sounds. So a little bit weird there without the dressing, but it just works this way. It's that fat sort of long snare sound. Yeah, and then so the way I had the microphones placed for this, I had the 57 sort of like right here, maybe at a bit more of an angle like that, and then I had the overhead somewhere like this, which was the small diaphragm condenser mic. That's it, and it's a pretty good snare sound, I think. It gives me that like long, deep snare sound that I really like in this kind of recording. So yeah, that's the snare sound. I'll just give you all three together for a second here, and we'll jump here. Cool. And so then the kick is just a sample, and the only thing I did was took down its loudness in a couple spots to give it like almost like a ghost note type feel, which is only on the verse sort of part of this little demo. Just pretty simple. I quantized the snare pattern as well, with just the ability to do that in Pro Tools. You can just basically cut on transients and snap the audio around. It's pretty handy. And then there's this like cross sticking thing I did for the verse part here too, and this is all overdubbed separately. And like pretty minimal processing on all this stuff. Like I did a little bit of EQ on most of the different drum sounds here, just to like honestly subtract stuff I didn't like more than add in anything. The hi-hats here are just a loop, which is this. And then I did two different shakers. One was like the classic egg shaker, which is this guy. Super nice, just simple sound. And then the other one was this guy. And so I have those panned opposite each other in the mix here, which are these. Oh, that's only one of them, and then here's the other. And then together, that's our shakers. I did some hand claps, which I recorded. And these were all, I think, with the same like overhead that I had for the snare drum, which was like a pencil condenser mic. And that sounds like this. Cool. And then the tambourine is also a loop, just because I don't own a tambourine, but it's on the list. Cool. And then did something kind of funky here, which was, it's these two tracks, the Sympathetic snare here. And all I did was play the recording of all these drum parts together out through my speakers, through my monitors, and I had both of the mics that I was using, so the SM57 and this pencil condenser, under the snare wire of my snare drum. And you get this like resonant buzzing of the snare wires from the source coming out of the speakers. So that's kind of a cool thing you can do to add some depth and realism to the whole part together. Just make it sound like it was played at once in one room. So that's these two together. Isaac here from the future again. So I realized when I was talking about the sympathetic snare thing, I actually forgot one of the other things I did with this, which was I recorded the same kind of thing with the microphones under the snare wires for the bass guitar track and also the electric guitar tracks. And it's just the same thing of like taking all these things that were recorded separately and adding to the illusion that maybe they were done together in a room with everything happening at once. And there are plugins you can use to do this as well. But if you don't want to use a plugin, you can do it this way if you have a snare drum. And so these are how those two tracks sound. So they're pretty low in the mix, and it's just to give it that extra sense of space. I'm doing some parallel compression stuff here for the drums just to bring out some cool stuff. But yeah, that's really like a look at some of the things you can do with recording somewhat convincing drums at home for singer-songwriter or folk rock type stuff. And it just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience to get the sounds right, and learning to trigger stuff with samples to layer those in. It can be a really rewarding thing to do, to build these like percussion and drum sounds all together, and sort of paint a picture that wasn't ever really there. It's something I like about working with overdub type recordings. Percussion can go a long way with recordings to adding some depth, like shakers and tambourines at different sections, the cross-sticking thing that's happening here. A couple of things that I'm not showing in this recording are stuff like brushes, which can be really cool on a snare drum to add like some extra textures and ideas there. There's no cymbals that I actually recorded myself in this. The hi-hats were a loop. But, with brushes, you can do some cool stuff too on cymbals, and it wouldn't be too loud in an apartment setting. The snare drum, I didn't hit that hard for this recording. And with all the muffling and damping, it's like, I would say doable in some apartments. Maybe depends on how thick your wall is. And then there's another thing that I didn't show here too, which is this plugin called Fostfat, which I found maybe last year. And it's a super cool plugin that lets you trigger like a white noise generator with an attack and release envelope, as well as like a low sine wave sub generator to add like the actual punch or resonance of the drum. And it doesn't sound like a drum sounds, but there are some cool things you can do with just like triggering like percussion and like fake drum sounds from kind of anything. There's a record I produced for somebody recently that I just tapped my fingers on my wooden desk here, and I had that feeding into this Fostfat plugin, and making like a kind of a snare groove with the white noise generator in that plugin. So there's a lot you can do, some interesting processing, and a few like pretty inexpensive pieces of gear. Give it a try. Try and make some interesting drum sounds with whatever you got. You can use like spice shakers or pepper grinders to do a shaker if you don't even have a shaker. So and if you're working with actual drums, it took me way too long to get a drum key and tune the snare drum up. So that's all I have for this one.